close to it.
Are you taking the lead on this one, Sarah? Yeah.
Yeah, if you're happy for me to. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very chilly but warm-hearted welcome to the afternoon slot of the new Human Gardener stage. My name is Sarah Owen Hughes, and I'm a professional horticulturist, along with my colleague and friend Faith Douglas, who's a curator at a local arboretum. And we're here for the whole week to inspire and educate and just explore the breadth and depth of the horticulture industry and hopefully find something that makes you go, oh, I didn't know that, or that's amazing. So it's a good 15-minute sit down, or 30-minute if you choose, and then you can carry on with your shopping for the rest of the trip. You can leave your family here. My dad left my mum here for 2 hours yesterday while he went to look at garden tools. So stay for as long as you want. And everybody who's talking is available to chat. They're all got stands at the side here. And this is all going to be on Instagram Live and YouTube as well later if you want to watch again. So our next guest is a friend and former colleague of mine, Niall Comboy, who works for BioBest UK. BioBest is a biocontrol company, and we're going to find out more about that. They specialise in advising on and supplying insects and fungi to help control pests and diseases in commercial horticulture. So we're going to find out a little bit more about how they detect and control some of the worst pests, aphids and whitefly, as well as how they promote pollination of crops and by using bees and beneficials. It's going to be quite interactive, so feel free at the end to come up and have a look at some of the insects that Niall's brought here. But can we give a very warm Harrogate welcome to Dr. Niall Comboy, the Biocontroller.
Yeah.
So, first question, Niall. What is a biocontroller?
So my job as biocontroller is to sort of visit commercial growers in horticulture. So people who grow tomatoes, peppers, even sort of soft fruit things like strawberries and raspberries. And my job is to visit growers, look at the pests that they have on site, and advise them on what biological controls they can use to control those pests. So biological controls are things primarily other insects. So a really good example of biocontrol is if aphid. I'm sure anyone who grows plants at home has dealt with aphid before. Ladybirds are a really good predator of aphid. So you can actually purchase ladybirds to put onto your plants to then eat your aphid, and of course it's that's just one example of many different examples of predators and parasites you can get for different pests. But yeah, that's essentially my job, because I sort of go around and see these lots of different crops, lots of different pests, and basically advise on what the best way of controlling that pest would be.
And how did you get into that role? Because it's not really something the careers advisors tell you about at school, is it?
No, I certainly didn't know about it when I was when I was at school. So I did biology at undergrad, and then obviously realised I had an interest in plants and insects and things like that, as I have done from being a kid. But I then went on to do a PhD where I looked at sort of sustainable and organic ways of controlling pests. Primarily it was with whiteflies on tomato plants. So I did that PhD, and then from there I then worked in commercial horticulture. I was a grower, and that's how I met Sarah. But again, even for a grower, a big part of that job is controlling pests, not just aphid, but as Sarah mentioned, you get whitefly, leaf miner, all manner of different pests, and choosing the right biological controls to control those pests is quite difficult, but it's really enjoyable. That's Sarah's job at the moment as well, and we still work together now on trying to control pests really, and it's really enjoyable trying to formulate a strategy that's going to work, and obviously very rewarding when it does work.
So haven't we got a plant on stage that actually has a pest right now?
Well, there's a residue of pests. When I brought my begonia rex over there, the leopard spot begonia, as I brought it to the show, I realised it was maybe a biohazard because it had some woolly aphid in the little crevices. So where the embryonic bud for the leaf folds back, it sort of becomes papery and dry, and that's the perfect environment for the woolly aphid. So I use squashology. I use my fingers and squash them all, and they make one heck of a mess when you get rid of them. But it's great because I imagine it's people that I don't like, and it's like organic pop paper. And when Niall turned up, I pointed them out, and I didn't see any woolly aphid in there today.
No.
I think we're reasonably clear.
Yeah.
But you, what did you do? You straight away got out some
luckily
controls.
Luckily I've brought some Adalia with me, which is
Two-spot ladybird, isn't it?
Two-spotted ladybird, yeah. So we've got some of the larva of the ladybird, which is the sort of younger stage of that insect. And I just put some on the plant for you. So about
Thank you.
eight quid's worth, something
That's
like
fine.
that.
That's fine.
You
Yeah,
know?
all right.
So,
Invoice me later.
You know. But yeah, they should get to work on eating that woolly aphid, and
Yeah,
you save getting horrible fingers.
And they're voracious as well. They eat.
Yeah.
If there isn't anything for them to eat, they eat each other, don't they? As well.
They do, yeah.
And they are really ugly as well. If you've not seen Ladybird Larvae, when I volunteer on the advice stand, the amount of times people show me a picture going, "What's this really awful bug?" And I go, "It's a ladybird."
Yeah.
And I go, "Oh," because they're really different, aren't they?
Yeah. That's the thing. I mean, you wouldn't believe it was similar to a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like completely different looking insects. Yeah.
Did you know that a collection of ladybirds is called a loveliness of ladybirds? I just love that.
Yeah.
A
That is brilliant.
loveliness
I
of
didn't know that.
ladybirds. There
Yeah.
you go.
Didn't
Every
know
day's a
that.
school day.
And I think that can only be said with a northern accent as well. It's like me saying good afternoon to everyone.
Loveliness.
A loveliness.
A loveliness of
A loveliness of
ladybirds.
ladybirds. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So tell me about, obviously you're working with lots of commercial growers. You're giving them advice. You're visiting them every week or every fortnight, whatever they need. So you are sort of an ecological support network.
Yeah.
Why would a commercial grower ask to use biocontrols? Because they're obviously not as controllable as just, as an old allotment gardener said to me, just spray it with something.
Well, yeah, that's it, isn't it? I think that's what we're up against in terms of not just with biocontrol, but just in terms of trying to grow our crops sustainably. You know, for a farmer or a grower, you know, they might say, well, I can just spray this crop with some horrible chemical. Why don't I just do that? And ultimately, if you judge efficacy based on killing the insects, then that's great. But of course, a lot of these pesticides, if you've got a load of aphid, for example, they won't just kill the aphid; they'll kill anything that's alive on those plants. So, it's not very good, really. But as you say, I mean, first thing I would say is that biological controls can be just as effective as those sprays and as those like nasty chemicals. And also, there's instances where biocontrols are actually just straight up a better option for controlling a particular pest. So, for example, commercial tomato growers really struggle with whitefly. I've had them in my greenhouse as well. I mean, I'm sure other people who've
Everyone will have had whitefly in their
Everyone's
greenhouses
had-
on the
yeah.
tomatoes. We've all been there.
Yeah, and there are sprays available for those, but whitefly are a really good example of a pest. It's actually really difficult to kill them with insecticides. One, because they've actually developed resistance to a lot of the insecticides we've got, but also, they like to sit on the underside of leaves, so you've got to get right up and under and spray the plants. So if you've got a small greenhouse, I mean, maybe that's a feasible option. But if you've got a huge tomato greenhouse where you've got thousands and thousands of plants, it's not feasible basically. And what we have for that is a parasitoid, which is like a very small wasp. You can only just see it, and it's really cheap. And you just release that into the greenhouse, and that will parasitize the whitefly eggs, and eventually just take out the population. And that's that's industry standard, the best way of controlling whitefly, really. So.
And increasingly within the industry, the customers, the supermarkets and the end consumers are reluctant to have things that have pesticide residue on them.
Absolutely.
And it's harder and harder to get hold of a lot of the pesticides because they no longer meet the strict criteria that we need to create good and healthy food.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing as well. We're running out of sprays we have available. It's that thing of, there are lots of insecticides available for lots of different insects, but insects over time will develop resistance to those insecticides, and we're not developing the new insecticides quick enough. Whereas an aphid can't develop resistance to a ladybird, or at least not in any time scale that would concern a grower. So it's definitely it's a sustainable option to use biological controls now. It's also sustainable for the future, long into the future. So it's still biocontrol. It's one of those things where people have been doing it in some form for a long time, but in terms of commercially available biocontrols, we're talking past 20-30 years, so we're still learning, and sometimes we get things wrong, and sometimes it can be the pests win, which is a shame, but with more practice and more people using these biological controls, we're just getting better at it. So it's it's all.
We all do it, don't we? Because anyone who has a pond at home, you hope for frogs and toads to help control the slugs and snails, and anyone who puts feed out for hedgehogs or hedgehog homes is hoping the same, because they're the big one that gardeners really struggle with. Although the RHS has now reclassified slugs, have you seen that?
Oh,
they no longer consider them to be a pest because they're part of the biosphere. So they've taken them off their list of pests. They've been rebranded.
Yeah, I'll still be buying slug pellets. If they get after my,
well, you can't buy a lot of the slug pellets. You can get nematodes. Actually, anybody who is interested in using nematodes on their cuttings and seedlings, Nemaslug are here in the show down at the bottom of that hall. Now, I'm a little bit distracted because there's a box here with things moving in it, Niall, and it's all very safe and sealed in, but can you explain what your green and purple box of tricks is?
Yeah, so believe it or not, but in that box down there is a Bumble Bee Hive. So, as Sarah says, they're sealed in. They're definitely not going to get out, but you can. There's a Perspex lid on the top, so you can come and have a look after the talk if you want. But yeah, this is an element of horticulture which some people might not realise, but all of our tomatoes, peppers, strawberries, pretty much anything you can think of with a flower that needs to be pollinated is pollinated by bumblebees. And you can buy a box of bumblebees that can get delivered to your greenhouse. I mean, it's
amazing.
Still, even though it's my job, I still think that's amazing.
Well, every week when our biological controls arrive, in the very front of the van is box after box of bumblebees, and you can just hear them sort of slightly fizzing, and they never escape. They're never loose, but they're being taken up to mostly Scotland, aren't they? For the strawberry growers, your strawberry growers,
yeah. But bumblebees are they're amazing. I mean, they're so much better than what our methods of pollination were before. I was just reading the other day actually, because I was thinking, what did we do before using bumblebees? And so in a tomato crop, for example, what they had to do was they had to go around and mechanically or manually just shake the plant.
Yeah.
And that had to be done sort of 3 times a week. And even then, pollination wasn't very
wasn't guaranteed.
Wasn't guaranteed. Whereas with a bumblebee hive, they're like 30, 40 quid, and they'll do a hectare of tomato plants for 5 or 6 weeks quite happily. I mean, it's amazing, really.
And bumblebees are really quite benign as well. It's perfectly safe to carry on working in there with them. If you go into commercial glass houses, they will have bee boxes, and they do normally have a warning to let you know that they're there. But they're really quite they're quite dozy because they've been drinking all the nectar, so they're quite spaced out, a bit like we are later
drunk.
On. They are drunk.
Yeah, that's the thing. As Sarah knows, my LinkedIn page is always filled with me getting right up close to a bumblebee hive and filming it, and they're not bothered. As long as you don't sort of swat them or sort of go for them in any way, they just get on with it and just leave you alone, really. Great.
So what else do we have on stage here? We've got some...
So we've also got some Adalia, so that's the 2-spotted ladybirds, so they're the ones which we've got on Sarah's houseplant. So these are, they're the ones in the paper. So these are quite a young, an early stage instar of this larvae. So they'll get to probably about a millimetre long, a bit longer than that, and then they'll pupate and become a ladybird. But
the eggs are stuck onto a piece of paper, aren't they, normally, and then they hatch out and
so you'll be able
around.
to see in there,
if you look
if
on
we
the
pass that
underside
around
face.
in a bit, you'll be able to see in there that there's the larvae in there, but then obviously the eggs as well. So and it's one of those things.
Tiny, aren't they?
Yeah, tiny. Yeah. I mean, you
but
do
really effective. Oh,
yeah.
I think my mum thinks that I play panpipes and release ladybirds in a sort of like a Snow White type way. But that's what I'm doing every day is taking those out and putting a pinch here and there onto the plant pots.
Yeah.
So this is something we could realistically do in our homes as well.
Yeah, for sure.
To be fair, yeah, definitely, yeah. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. You might find that if you're doing it on house plants that you might get an influx of ladybirds then hatching off at some point. But I don't think that'd bother anyone. It won't bother me.
You'd have a
Interesting.
loveliness.
Yeah.
We're quite happy
Exactly.
to tolerate them, but woolly aphid, I'm having none of it.
No,
yeah.
exactly,
What about
yeah.
the one in the middle? The cardboard box.
So yeah, the one in the middle. So
Just be
that's,
careful with this one,
That's
Faith.
actually the.
No, it's fine. It's just they
That's-
bite me. I don't know why they're the
Yeah,
only thing we release that bite me.
Oh really?
I don't bite
yeah.
anyone else.
Yeah, they've not bitten me before, but yeah, I heard they,
I knew
they
that
can
would
bite.
happen.
Can I take the lid off or not?
I wouldn't.
Okay.
Yeah,
What is
they're
it?
all sort of ready to come out, if you know what I mean. But what we've got, they're actually
They're little soldier bugs.
They're what?
yeah.
What are they?
Sort of well, like sometimes known as a pirate bug.
Pirate bug,
pirate
okay.
beetle.
Yeah.
So they're aureus.
Oh.
So they're primarily used for attacking thrips.
Are they in
so
that?
that's yeah. So
They're
that's
in
what
that
we've
one
got
there.
in
Okay.
that one there. Yeah. So in the cardboard tub, that's how they're sort of supplied. That's how they're sent to people. It's our sort of new. We're, as a company, we're sort of working towards being even more sustainable and using sort of recyclable packaging. But yeah, so that's the aureus in there. So they're mainly used for targeting thrip, and thrip are another insect where, there are sprays available, but the best thing to do really is to introduce another bug to eat those.
So again, these are tiny.
Yeah,
They are tiny, and they're in
Tiny.
buckwheat husks.
Yeah.
So that's again, it's not an allergen, and it just holds them together and gives them airspace.
Yeah.
But thrips, if you see them on your plant, you'll know you've got it because you get this silvery, almost like stretch mark type
Yeah.
scarring on lower leaves.
Quite distinctive,
particularly.
isn't it?
It is distinctive,
But also
yeah.
easily missed, I think.
Yeah,
it's,
very much
it's,
so, yeah.
It's one of those things because you don't actually see the thrip unless you really,
They are
really
minuscule,
have a look. Yeah.
But you've got your viewer around your
yeah,
neck there.
Yeah, just casually got this, So this is what I use to, when I'm walking around crops, I'll be using this to
You'll
look
be going
for
around the
things
flower
like.
show later.
I know, yeah. I've got to have a good look at these houseplants before I go. There might be some more pests on there.
We'll not be allowed
You
back.
want to take a look at this one here. This has come from my house, and this did not look great when we first brought it here. And I had to Lydia had to remove a whole load of brown leaves, and it's not a happy plant at all.
No,
Not a
yeah.
happy plant.
Yeah. But so I mean, I guess that's one of the harder parts of the job, really. That there are insects that you can't really see with the naked eye, and like
Yeah.
Sarah said,
Yeah.
the main thing I'm sort of looking for is insects I can see like aphid, but then also like spider mites and thrips where you won't actually see the insect, you just see the damage, and that's kind of what I'm looking for.
So can I ask you about mushrooms? So
You can do, yeah.
I work in an arboretum, and one of the
Okay.
biggest pests we have in the arboretum is honey fungus.
Oh right, okay.
So this is a mushroom that goes underground and it
Yeah.
attacks the tree and the tree dies, and it happens very suddenly. There's
Yeah.
often not a lot of warning. You can have no idea. One minute a tree will look great, the next day a tree will be literally dead, and there's not a
Really?
great deal you can do. So the biological control for that is mycorrhizae.
Okay, yeah.
So do you know much about mycorrhizae? How we can...
Not that much. No,
Right.
no. I mean, yeah, that's one of the things I haven't really encountered on my
Yeah.
travels. Really, I mean, I'm usually dealing with sort of plants which are grown for food. Really,
Right.
so
Yeah, more
but-
crops.
But you use
but-
biofungicides.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah,
We
within
do
that,
have
yeah.
some. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is the thing. We're always trying to get growers to use biofungicides, but they really are just kind of.
Yeah.
At the moment, at least, it just seems like they just want to use a standard fungicide. So
Yeah.
it's,
Why do you think we opt for the spray, the chemical, over a
don't know.
biological control?
I don't know. I mean, certainly there are some. I mean, I'm not completely anti-spray or anything like that. IPM or integrated pest management. One of the main sort of components of that is using pesticides, but using them sparingly
Yeah.
and as a last resort.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, certainly there are situations where I will advise a grower to say, you know what, this infestation's gone too far. You're going to have to do a spray.
Yeah.
But I think ultimately using biological controls, it's quite hard. It's quite, you have to think about it. You have to use the right insects at the right time, right insects for the right pests.
Yeah.
If you haven't got them in early enough, then you might have lost the game altogether. And I think that's probably what it is. It's just a bit more.
Spray is easy. It's laziness.
It's
laziness at the end of the day.
It's easy and it's
really?
measurable as well. So, on every Monday I'm just going to spray everything.
Yeah.
And it's measured,
and some people
you know
do
what
that.
it's going to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whether they need it or not.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're, as you know, when I'm going around the glass houses, I go around twice a week, and I'm in there 4 days a week, but I check twice a week, and I'm looking at the sort of the cycles of the insects and the progression of the damage. And some days I need to put that treatment out today, and others is actually I'll leave it till tomorrow because I think that's going to be peak pest season, and that the biological that I'm going to use is going to work better. Yeah. And I think obviously that's commercially, and we were talking this morning about how research starts at cereals and food crops and then works its way down into the domestic market. I think this is where we're going to be going, because there are fewer and fewer chemicals available in garden centres. Again, rightly so, because a lot of the raw ingredients are not suitable for use. But we just need to re-educate ourselves in the use of biological controls and biofungicides, which are actually using another fungus to kill a fungus.
It's so like fungal wars. It's buddies versus goodies.
It eats the other fungus, but it doesn't leave a residue and it doesn't cause any long-term damage.
And that's the thing, isn't it? Obviously, I work for a company that provide these biocontrols that you can purchase, but in an ideal world, we'd be able to grow our crops outside, and if you got a load of aphid, then predators would naturally come in and eat.
But we keep saying that we want strawberries for Christmas and tomatoes all year round. So it's one of those things, isn't it?
That's it.
And I don't know if you've noticed now, but the weather's quite changeable in Yorkshire, so we can't always rely on it to grow the crops we want to eat throughout the year. No, this has been just fantastic. As you know, you and I can talk all day, and we have been known to. But if anybody has any questions about biological controls and insects and any pests that they may have in their garden, Niall is around for the rest of the day. But in the meantime, can we just give a big Yorkshire thank you to Dr. Niall Conboy from BioBest.
Thanks.
Thank you, Niall. Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a very chilly but very warm-hearted welcome to the Human Gardener, the brand new Human Gardener stage at the Harrogate Spring Flower Show. My name is Sarah Owen Hughes and I'm a professional horticulturist, and along with my great friend Faith Douglas, who's a curator at a local arboretum, we are here to bring you snapshots of some of the most interesting, fascinating people from the breadths, depths and widths of horticulture. It's the people behind the plants. So feel free to sit, take your weight off your feet, go off and buy a coffee before you go off and buy even more plants. I can see there's going to be nothing left for me to buy tomorrow when I come in. But again, hopefully this will just inspire, entice and raise a few questions. There'll be things that you maybe never heard of before. So now we're about to chat to Marina, who is a good friend, a long-standing friend. We've known each other for a number of years now. Marina is a woodland officer for the Forestry Commission. She has got her BSc in plant biology. She has an MSc in forestry. And she worked for Gentech doing soft fruit micropropagation. She did a research project into Latin American agroforestry. She's done plant nursery work with woody shrubs and plant selection. She was one of the best lecturers in soil and plant science I've ever encountered. She dragged some of my worst students through all their qualifications. In spite of their best efforts, she got them through and passed because of her passion and inspiration for plants. And she is now a woodland officer with Forestry Commission. So can you please put your hands together and give a very, very warm Harrogate welcome to Marina Martinoni, the woodland officer.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us, Marina. Lovely to meet you again. We met at Thorpe Perrow Arboretum, didn't you? And you brought a load of students round to come and visit and have a look at my glorious trees. So lovely to see you again. So tell me a little bit about your journey. How have you reached where you are right now?
So I grew up in the Italian Alps, and I was fascinated by the natural world. So I went on to study biology and then plant biology, and then I learned through my studies in Germany and Denmark how possible it is and how successful it is to achieve sustainable forestry. Forestry can achieve 3 key elements of sustainability, which is economic outputs, you can get ecological benefits as well as social values. And basically you are on a winner with forestry. So I thought, yes, that's what I want to share. Yeah. And that's what I do.
So you work for the Forestry Commission. Yeah. So just tell me one thing, because I do a little bit of work with Dalby Forests, which is Forestry England.
Yes.
And I remember having a chat to one of the recreational managers up there, and I kept saying Forestry Commission, Forestry Commission. He kept telling me off, and he was saying it's not Forestry Commission, it's Forestry England.
Yes.
So I'm a little bit confused. You're Forestry Commission, he's Forestry England. What's the difference? Explain that.
That's right. There are a lot of organisations out there, all with forestry, and you hear Woodland Trust, Forestry England, London Forest Scotland, and so on. So we all work for the Forestry Commission is divided into 2. Forestry England, which owns and manages woodlands, such as Dalby Forest, Hamsterley. So they set up and they carry out the management work, such as thinning, felling, and so on. And generally, these woodlands are open to the public.
Yeah.
So if you want to volunteer or plant trees, help maintaining the park, then you need to contact Forestry England. I work for Forestry Services, which is the other half of the Forestry Commission, which is incentives and regulations. So we don't own anything, we just help the public accessing grants for planting trees or managing their woodlands, obtaining a felling license, making sure that they are compliant with the policy and legislation.
Right. So in your role as a woodland officer, what exactly do you do?
A range of things, and that's the good thing about being a woodland officer. There is a variety of reasons why the public approaches us, again, to obtain felling licenses, but sometimes we get a lot of calls from the public reporting what is suspected alleged illegal felling. So if a neighbour or they walk and they see a large clear fell somewhere, then they report it to us and we check that a license was in place. And if a license wasn't in place, we are able, if the Forestry Act has been breached, to impose a restocking notice, so the trees need to be replanted. We also help writing management plans. well, we don't write it ourselves, but again, we point the applicants in the right direction, give grants, approve grants. If there is a disease, a tree health disease, the public can apply for subsidies to replant, sometimes even fell the woodland before restocking. So, we also forge or try to maintain partnerships with the likes of the Woodland Trust, the River Trust, National Trust as well. They're all very keen in planting, and so we help them to make sure that the woodlands are planted in the right place.
Yeah, it's a real collaboration. It has to be, hasn't it?
Yes,
so many
absolutely.
really amazing organisations, especially when it comes to trees, and especially right now, that it's good that everybody's sort of coming together, isn't it, and working together. So what's one of the biggest challenges in creating woodland in this country?
I would say many people think that is the lack of land.
Yeah.
But it isn't really, because generally the land that is being put forward for woodland creation is grade 3, very poor quality land, so not prime land for agriculture anyway. And there are potentials, for example, at the margin of farms, to plant hedgerows or trees. So I would say more than anything is the awareness of the schemes that are available. And for that reason, do come and contact your local woodland officer. You know, we are here to help. Awareness of schemes. Sometimes the bureaucracy may pose a hurdle for some people. But again, there are forestry agents out there that can do it for you for a small fee. I would say these are probably the biggest challenges.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about planting trees. We must plant trees, and I would always say we must plant trees. We absolutely need to be planting trees. But what about our existing woodlands? Because I know, you know, if we talk about carbon and how much carbon a tree traps, and you know the job it does, a whole woodland, the whole life within that woodland, not just that one individual tree traps the carbon, the moss on the ground, the plants on the ground, the soil, the mushrooms. It's the whole woodland is a life in its own right, isn't it? Not just one individual tree. So how important is it that we protect what we've actually got already?
Absolutely essential. Like you say, it's great to plant young woodlands, but they will take 50, 100 years' time to establish. And for all those microbial communities, which we don't see and we don't appreciate at a quick glance, to establish, it does take a long time. So that's why it's extremely important to preserve those woodlands, manage them properly. And we do have a series of set of grants for that specific purpose. For people, we give £1,000 for people just to sit down and write a management plan, just to write it, and then further following to that, with a management plan, an approved management plan, an applicant can apply for the countryside stewardship higher tier set of schemes, which provides ongoing support on a yearly basis, financial support to look after the huge cultural, environmental value that is a woodland. Once you own a woodland, you are a custodian of a huge treasure of things, like you say, that we don't always see.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's so great to see another woman in forestry, in woodland management, because we're a rarity, aren't we?
Yes, certainly a minority.
We absolutely are, aren't we? What do you think is like the biggest challenges that you've experienced at being a woman in a, dare I say, a man's world?
Yes, it is still very male-dominated. Yeah. Even working for the Commission, which is a government body, it is. Part of it, I would say, is just tradition. I would say that in my personal experience, I've not had bad experiences. Yeah. It's it's a very civilized world. But again, I work for Forest Services, where perhaps women got there a little bit quicker. Forestry England may be a little bit different, where when it comes to the actual felling and the physical work associated with it. So I don't have very close experience of that, but I would say certainly a welcoming environment, certainly there is a strong push to promote diversity. So yes, if you're a woman and you've got a little seed inside you that says trees, yes, come along. There are plenty of opportunities.
Well, I've met many women tree surgeons. So yeah, it is a very physical job, and I picked a chainsaw up myself and climbed a tree myself. Not anymore, I have to say.
Well, one of our mutual friends she's still the outstanding Welsh national tree climbing champion, and she's in her early 40s, and she's phenomenal. And when we were both teaching arborists, I would say 5 to 10% of our intake year on year were young girls. Yeah. And actually, morphologically, they were better climbers because we climb from our hips. We're built in a different way. Yeah. So we climb from our hips. We're a little bit more risk averse, so we're a bit more careful and considered. And we possibly have better spatial awareness in some circumstances. And so the industry is getting there. Actually, far faster than sports turf, for example, which we talked about this morning.
You know, we're smaller, lighter, bendier, and when it comes to wandering around a tree in a canopy, it's actually a lot easier for a female to be up there moving around. One of the biggest challenges for me is your chainsaw weight. They're heavy, but now you've got the introduction of electric chainsaws, ones, which are actually dead easy to pick up with one hand. Yeah. And it's so much easier, physically, because we're not as physically strong, are we? It's harder to pick up a great big chainsaw, but it's... So what's the thing you enjoy about your job the most?
Certainly visiting the woodlands and discussing with the applicants, the landowner, the potentials, and trying to extract and see that potential, which is there, but sometimes it does require some intervention. So sometimes we do advise selective tree felling to free up some light, some space for the ground flora as well, because there's so much, and I keep saying it, but there is so much potential to achieve an all-round woodland that doesn't just offer 100% commercial value or 100% value for the wildlife, but it's not as attractive perhaps for people because it may be perhaps too dense, or it will never lead to a decent firewood crop. It is absolutely possible to achieve all of that, and that's the thing that I love the most, to see the resilience into a woodland, to try to implement those changes that allow for the wildlife to get in. Yeah. People to have a bit of a smile when they look at a tree and they say, oh, actually it's blooming. Oh, I like when it changes the bark in that color. When it's a bit of a cold, frosty day, you see that changes. So that's what I like. Yeah.
So how exactly does a woodland impact on our wildlife? Why are they so beneficial to wildlife, especially in this country?
Yeah. Sarah will back me up perhaps on this. She's much more geared up in research than I am at the moment, but there is a lot that we don't know still. About more and more research is emerging, but in terms of tree communications, through mycorrhizae, pheromones, even insect potentially mediated, disease, spread, diffusion, distribution.
Well, we know that things like ash trees, when one tree gets ash dieback, it sends a panic message to all the other ash tree in the forest through the roots. We actually, only a few years ago, we thought it was chemical signals from the leaves, but we now realise it's actually through the roots and through this network that they communicate. And the other ash trees drop their leaves early, they defoliate as a panic reaction. It's a bit like a child going, you can't see me, by covering their eyes, but that's what they're doing to try and stop themselves getting infected. So these are things that we've never really looked at the soil and below before, but now we're realising how massively important it is. And actually I was talking to someone the other day about using mycorrhizae when you're planting trees, and he said, well, actually just taking a cup of soil from an established woodland nearby and putting that in is more effective than introducing your shop-bought, off-the-shelf mycorrhizal powder. That will inoculate the soil and establish that plant far, far faster.
Yeah. And that's something we do know, is the diversity in a woodland is unbelievable when it comes to not just the tree species. There has to be diversity within the tree species, but the insects, the mammals, the birds, the mushrooms, the microbes in the soil. It's a whole one life, isn't it?
Yes.
Full of many other
Yes.
lives, which is just fascinating.
And the forms and shapes of trees as well, the
Yeah.
more crooks and water pools and raised, even flaky barks sometimes can be a wonderful habitat for a lot of...
We can be too neat and tidy, can't we? And the gnarliest, fallen down tree, do not tidy it up. Leave it. We've got tree stumps left in the Arboretum that have been standing there for such a long time, and it's a life in its own right. The tree is no longer has its canopy, but it's still a life, and it still houses life. And it's amazing what you see develop and grow within just a tree stump. But we're tidy, aren't we? We like to, tidy up. So what can the public do to support the Forestry Commission, and what can we do in our own back gardens to encourage wildlife and trees?
Yes. So I think a lot of children nowadays get involved, perhaps through schools, in planting trees, and that's a wonderful thing that anyone can do. Anyone can go out, pick a few seeds, and see and learn how different germination rates have an impact on our everyday life, really, in everything. So obviously planting trees is the most obvious one. Not everyone has access to a garden. You can still grow trees in a windowsill or in a pot, of course, on a windowsill. You can certainly volunteer with the Forestry Commission or our organisations. For that, again, I would recommend Forestry England as a best starting point. You can sign up to the newsletter. The Forestry Commission has a newsletter which will keep you up to date with some pests and diseases that can spread in the country. And if you notice any of such pests, you can then report it onto a website. It's called Tree Alert, which is very much still up and running. It was very popular during the ash dieback first wave of spread, but there are new diseases. There's a new Phytophthora disease called Phytophthora pluvialis, which is now affecting mostly conifer trees, actually, and we rely very much on the public and the citizens to report sightings of these diseases.
Do you know something? You two just come alive when you're talking about trees. I don't know if anyone else can see. Their eyes are glistening and they're both on super high alert. It's so exciting when you are privileged enough to sit with people who are talking about something they're passionate about. And I hope neither of you ever lose that passion, because it's just been amazing. Can we all just say a huge thank you, a Harrogate thank you to the most amazing Marina Martinoni from the Forestry Commission. Thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you.
And then I had it on my hand and went, oh, get it off me quickly.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and a warm-hearted but slightly breezy welcome to the Human Gardener stage, live at the Harrogate Spring Flower Show. My name is Sarah Owen Hughes. I'm a professional horticulturist, or plant botherer, as somebody said earlier. And my job this week is to spend some time with my very good friend, Faith Douglas, who's a curator at a local arboretum. And we are bringing together some of the most interesting and amazing people from the breadth and depth of horticulture, the people behind the plants. So people who do things you might not even have known existed. And I hope that it will inspire and enthuse you. It might just give you 5 minutes to rest before you go off and buy more plants or hit the gin tent. But we hope it's something that's interesting. You'll be able to see all of these interviews on Instagram Live, on the Human Gardener page, and also on YouTube, so you can watch them to your heart's content and use them, and it's better than what's on the telly at the moment. So I have now got a long-standing friend of mine who we locked eyes many years ago when she came into my office, and someone said she's into insects, and I said tell me more, and she's not been able to get rid of me since, and that's a common theme for this week, isn't it?
It is.
People that I've tracked down and forced to be my friend. So Hannah Fenton is a PhD researcher with the Food and Environment Research Agency in York, where she's looking into ways to reduce the use of pesticides by integrating organic compounds. Yeah. We're going to hear about her research. We're going to hear a little bit about what Ferra does to help improve plant growth, and actually find out about what a PhD is, because I think quite a lot of people don't know. So can we have a really big, warm Harrogate afternoon welcome to pending Dr. Hannah Fenton from Ferra, our insect researcher. So, Han, how are you doing?
Hi, all good, thanks.
All good, all good. I love your T-shirt.
Thank you.
She's got a very buggy T-shirt there. So let's start with something really, really simple, because people will have heard of DEFRA, and they know that's the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, or MINAVAG, as a lot of people still call it, Ministry of Agriculture, or MAF, as it used to be. MAF, but what's Ferra?
So, well, it does so many things. It helps test new pesticides, fungicides. It does field monitoring for pests and diseases. It helps to develop new ways of IPM, which someone's mentioned earlier, integrated pest management. They ID pests and diseases coming into the country. They work to try and stop new pests and diseases coming into the country by IDing them and stopping shipments and things. And they also do testing for people who want to do shipping, and they want to make sure that their stock is nice and clean and they're not introducing new diseases to the countries they're sending them to. So, and it's got a B unit, and they do there's so many departments, even I haven't gone round them all yet.
Yeah, and it is a huge organisation, isn't it, Ferra? Yeah. It works alongside DEFRA, and one of the main hubs is in York, in Sand Hutton, isn't it?
Yeah,
and
that's where I am.
It's a phenomenal, it's like a big spaceship, isn't it? Yeah. Beautiful, huge building with lakes and fruit farms, orchards and all sorts outside.
Yeah, the glass houses are amazing. I only see a small snapshot when I go pick up my cabbages, but I always gaze through the windows at what else they're doing. Yeah.
Yes, because of course, obviously, for biosecurity purposes, you probably can't go in and out of all glass houses.
No.
You don't know what's being sprayed in some cases, what's being grown in some places, but also, I'm guessing, you can't always talk about what's going on in some of them. It's highly confidential.
Yeah, there's probably some bits going on there that I don't know about, and I'm quite happy about that.
Yeah.
And they're probably quite happy about it. But also, if I work with my insects, I then can't just wander into someone else's.
Of course. Again, that's...
Otherwise, I'll introduce some of my pests
biosecure,
to them.
Yes. Yes, because you are actually actively working with pests, things that we don't want, to work out ways of making them less of a problem, aren't you?
Yeah.
So let's wind back a little bit and talk about a PhD. So first of all, explain to anybody who doesn't know, what is a PhD?
So it's normally 3 years full-time of study. So you pick a project and you work on that project for those 3 years, and it normally evolves into a many-legged beast after a while, because you figure something out and you sort of follow that trail for a bit, and then 6 new trails open up, so you try and pick one of those and follow that for a bit. And And you present your work and just do experiments and study for 3 years, and it's fun.
So it's after a degree, and it's generally after a master's as well,
yes,
and it's an absolute focus on one
particular
very
question, normally
specific question, isn't
Yeah.
it? And there are lots of rabbit holes.
So many
rabbit holes.
So many.
We're both studying for PhDs at the same time, so we're sort of supporting emotional support help for each other. And I heard one of my children describing what I do as, well, she seems to do something with invisible worms. And actually, that's probably about all anyone needs to know is my work with nematodes is invisible worms.
Invisible worms.
And so what are you doing with yours? You're working with what insects?
Several. So I've got 5 that I'm focusing on. So I've got 2 flies, a cabbage root fly and a fruit fly.
Yeah.
A butterfly or caterpillar, a moth.
Yeah.
An aphid, which is the bane of most growers' lives.
Yeah.
And, what's the other? A beetle.
A beetle.
Yes, so I've got one from each that I'm sort of playing with. And I'm looking at pesticide resistance.
Right, okay.
Because it's a huge problem now. There are very few pesticides that actually work on several species. Over 600 species of insects are now resistant to the pesticides we have.
Really?
Yeah, but that was a few years ago, so there'll be plenty more now. And it's just not working anymore. Industrial pesticides are being sprayed on. All it's doing is driving resistance. And they're still using pesticides, and it's not making any difference, unfortunately.
So what are you trying to do to overcome that? What sort of area is your research in?
I've gone back to the origins of pesticides. I've gone back to plants. That's where pesticides started with chrysanthemum flowers. And I've gone back to botanical extracts. So I'm using plant oils, essential oils, compounds extracted from plants. And there's some evidence to suggest that if you put them with a small amount of pesticide, it makes it effective again. Because the plant extract is blocking the resistance somehow in the insect. So it actually restores the resistance, and it helps to control them a lot better. And you don't have to use as much pesticide at all. You can take it down by 90%, and it may still be effective.
Wow, that's really significant, isn't it?
Better for the environment, better control, better, people are really aware of what's on their food nowadays. And people don't necessarily want these chemicals. I work with some horrid chemicals, and they go on the food.
Yeah.
So, people are becoming much more aware.
So there is a reason why it says wash grapes before eating.
God, yeah. Do you think that we could actually see a time when we would have 0 pesticides?
That's the dream. I don't know whether there will be 0. Pesticide control is fundamental to IPM or pest management. It's a last resort, but it works. And with the growing population in the world, pesticides and fungicides and things are just a requirement at the minute. But if we can reduce the amount we use to the point where we're not toxifying the environment, and we're not killing people or animals or beneficial insects, then that will be a bonus. That will be a real win. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your pathway to where you are now, because every child loves insects. They're fascinated with them at some level or other. Not every child or adult sits there like this vibrating because I'm asking about something with 6 legs. So what happened? At what stage did you go, this is where I want to be?
Probably university, but it started well before then. I was living in my grandparents' garden, and they would point out the butterflies and all the insects, and I would just be amazed. How does a caterpillar turn into a butterfly, for goodness sake? That's just ridiculous. But it happens.
It's soup, isn't it? It's amazing, yeah.
I used to poot up insects, so get a pooter, everyone. It's brilliant. You get a little jar, 2 straws. You point one at the insect you want to have a look at, and you suck in, and it pops into the jar. And you can count the spots on a ladybird, and you can watch ants running around, and it's brilliant. I used to do that quite a lot. And then when I went to uni and I found, insect modules, they were just my highest scorers. I just loved them. They're just completely different.
To you, doesn't it?
And my projects were on it, and I just thought they're so easy to work with as well. Tigers are beautiful, but they take up a lot of space.
Yeah.
Whereas my insects, I can put them in a little pot and just watch them, and they're fine. So I went and then did my masters. I just love learning as well.
Yeah.
I think that makes a difference.
What's your favourite insect? You to pick one. I'm going to make you pick one insect.
Oh, now you've started. Oh, dear. It's got to be a beetle, I think. I've got a very soft spot for beetles. Ladybirds are lovely.
But
my beetle of choice would probably be, it's a carrion beetle that I worked with during my master's. Gruesome life cycle, but they're brilliant. They're gorgeous. They're one of life's recyclers, recycling nutrients. I think that just sort of drove me further into science and study. And then I lectured for a bit and tried to inspire students to do projects and insects. Yeah. And then I saw this PhD and I thought, well, that's just made for me. It's brilliant.
So you're obviously studying or doing your studying at Ferrer.
Yes.
It's a Ferrer PhD, but you're affiliated with a university.
Yeah.
With
Newcastle University,
okay.
Yes.
So how does that work? Do you sort of have to travel between the two?
I do a little bit. I'm mainly based at Ferrer, so I use their research facility, and between them, Newcastle and Ferrer, they have studentships, which they both sort of support and fund. So I'm mainly based at Ferrer, but I do go up to Newcastle to do some tests. There are some newfangled machineries that I need to use in Newcastle and things that I quite like getting up for.
So do you meet other students at Ferrer as well? There are other people researching other things, I presume.
Yes, yeah. So there's normally a sort of small handful of students each year that start at Ferrer. And due to COVID, that's been a bit of a struggle actually meeting them. I started after the first lockdown.
Yeah.
So I haven't really met many other students at all. But in a normal life, then yes, I would have been working with more students and
I've literally been working with colleagues for 18 months and I've seen their faces for the first time in the past month.
It's amazing.
Because we've all had masks and we've all been distanced and I've sort of gone and gone,
recognise half of them.
Yeah. Oh, that's what you look like. Yeah. Completely different. Yes, it has had a huge impact. And,
massive,
and the whole point of research is it shouldn't be a solo act, should it? You need to collaborate and bounce ideas and inspire each other. Yeah. And where do you see it going when you eventually become Dr. Fenton?
Oh,
which is not that far away.
Sounds
No pressure.
Good, doesn't it?
Does.
That sounds good.
I quite like the ring of that one.
I want to do more science.
Yeah.
I want to keep going with science. I love it. I did enjoy my teaching, so if I could do a little bit of that as well, great. But I just love science. I love coming up with a question, testing it, and ending up with 50 more questions that I just want to keep going with. That's what science is for me. It's just fun and challenging and brilliant.
Insects as well. There's not as many people in insects as you say, like large mammals. I've got a niece who studies marine insects because she said everybody wants to study dolphins and whales and they're quite big. It's hard to find them. There's quite big. There's not very many of them, but there's competition for the jobs.
Yeah.
But you look at the insect life, there are very, very few people doing what you do, and that's
I think
super exciting.
They run the world. We wouldn't have food, we wouldn't have anything without insects, and we wouldn't have the big animals because they wouldn't be able to survive without insects. The food chain starts from below. So they're just very special.
They are super special. And you know, I just love how your face is lit up.
I love
you are literally bouncing, talking about insects. Seriously, I mean, Hannah's just an inspiration to us all because she is so passionate about insects and research. I wish you all the best luck in the world. I need your shoes. We need to talk about that later. And and if anybody wants to know anything more about insects and insect research, please come and have a chat to Hannah when she leaves the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, a huge Harrogate thank you to Hannah Fenton from Ferrer, the insect researcher.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm-hearted, if slightly breezy, welcome to the brand new Human Gardener stage here at the Harrogate Spring Flower Show. And this is our final talk for today. And I don't know where the time's gone, Faith. We have just, it's flown by. I think this might be our 10th slot of the day. I don't know. I've lost count.
I don't know what day it is. So.
I don't know who I am anymore. I've checked on my badge and my name is Sarah Owen Hughes, but I'm a professional horticulturist and I'm here with Faith Douglas, who's a curator at a local arboretum, and we're here to excite and inspire people and talk about things that you might not have considered as part of the horticulture world. And we've said it's the people behind the plants, but actually we're now going to talk about something that isn't actually a plant. It's more closely related to humans, and I'm very excited that this is going to be one of those talks that we could talk forever. So I really want to get lots of people excited about this and get the word out about brewing and fermenting. And we're going to be talking now to Dr. Keith Thomas from Brew Lab Limited. Keith is the manager of Brew Lab, and he provides training and support services to the brewing and fermentation industry. He has been a lecturer in mycology at Sunderland University since 1992, and he regularly teaches specialist courses in food fermentation, as well as instructions on craft and professional brewing. So can we please have our hands together for a very warm welcome from Harrogate to Dr. Keith Thomas from Brew Lab, our fungi fermenter.
Thank you so much for joining us, Keith. I'm so excited about this, right? Because mushrooms are one of my most favourite things, along with trees. Keith has come into the Arboretum for a number of years, haven't you, and delivered our fungus forays for us, because we have a wide range of fungus growing in the Arboretum. So it's really exciting to have you here, Keith. So tell us a little bit more about your job role, please.
Now, that's an interesting question, Faith. I see people looking at the beer on the front there and thinking, are we going to get a little taster of beer? And we could. But really, beer is just one of the focuses that we work with. We started off looking at beer and answering the question, how can we train people to brew good beer? How can we train people to brew commercial beer? Home brewing's been popular for decades now. Commercial brewing's taken off in perhaps the last 20 years. And to be honest, it was a difficult journey. And to be honest, when I started being involved, some of the beers were pretty bad. You know, I remember going and doing a festival in a park and setting up a beer tent with some casks of beer, which I was very proud of. And when we served them, I was so embarrassed because people brought them back. They were stale, they were flat, they didn't fizz and everything like that. And I was so embarrassed that I had to take them into the laboratory and look at them and then go back to the breweries and say, well, you need to do this and so on. And we started doing courses, and then that grew into doing analysis so as to give the feedback to people as to the quality of beer and how to develop new beers and different beers and things like that. So it's sort of been focused on beer, but has since broadened because people have wanted to brew other things. Cider, they've wanted to brew kombucha, as you can see on the front corner of the table here, which is really fermented tea. It's not alcoholic, it's something you can easily make at home. It's a sort of interesting combination of yeast and bacteria and fungi and so on. And then there's growing mushrooms. I mean, you've mentioned there's mushrooms growing, of course, in the arboretum, in the fields and everywhere, and people collect those. And we've been very interested. I've always been a mycologist at heart, and looking at fungi in the microscope and in the woodland, and getting an idea of what is there in different seasons and so on. But also, a lot of people are looking for fungi. Can I eat it? Or if I eat it, will I die? And that's not impossible, as we know. And it's a matter of just going through as to the simple ones to learn and then developing experience from there. So I think we've broadened from beer as a major thing that we've looked at to fermentation generally, and foods of people can make themselves quite easily.
So how exactly did you get into this role? What's your journey been like?
It's into doing this role has been accidental.
Okay.
I started out looking at using fungi to digest paper waste into biofuel. And that was a long time ago when there was an energy crisis just like there is now. And the idea was we've got so much paper all over the place. We put it in our bins now, but years ago it just used to go into the main waste. And there was a an initiative to be able to say, how can we convert that into something useful and not have it blowing around the environment? By the time I'd finished doing that work, the fuel crisis had gone, so it wasn't really, an urgency. So I moved into yeast work, fermenting beer and so on. And now it's come back more to fungi. So, we've done work recently with John Innes Institute, looking at heritage barleys. So to make beer, you use barley, you mash it, you add hops, you boil it, you then ferment it, you get beer. The barley that goes in at the beginning is the fundamental part of it. And one of the projects people questioned was, how do barleys compare today to barleys 100 years ago, 200 years ago? And John Innes have the residue or the stocks. They keep seeds from those original varieties. And we grew some up and looked at the effect of diseases. Would those diseases be as bad on those barleys as they are now? And we found that the barleys from 100 years ago were very susceptible to mildew, but very resistant to fusarium, which is the big bad disease that rots a lot of crops. And they would have developed over many, probably centuries, to have had that disease resistance. Modern barleys have lost it. And having found that, it was a good possibility that those barleys would be able to be used for organic growth without pesticide use. However, the big problem is that they were quite tall. So an old barley, one of the heritage ones, is about 1 metre tall. Modern cropping can't do that. It's too tall. It all falls over. So we'd like to grow it, but we can't harvest it. So the next step is to breed the tall varieties with the dwarf varieties for today to get one that is dwarf, can be harvested, but resistant to disease. So that's a fungus application of a sort of beverage project.
Interesting. Okay. So have you always been interested in fungi? When you left school, is that something that you just knew you wanted to go into?
I would say yes, and it's embarrassingly that we do forays at the Arboretum for yourselves, and we show people which ones are edible and which ones not to eat, which ones not to try. And when I was a teenager, when I was really quite young, I used to go out into the woods, collect fungi, take them home, and give them to my mother, who would cook them, believing I knew what I was talking about. And I didn't. I thought they looked like mushrooms, and thankfully they weren't poisonous.
Oh my goodness.
So from that, I gradually developed more expertise, and I think now I know what not to eat.
You do. I think you're pretty good at that as well. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the stuff you've got on the table in front of us? I think we've got a roaming microphone, if you want to pick it up. And I'm very interested in your kombucha because I have a little story to tell about your kombucha, which you might not be aware of, but I'm going to enlighten you right now, okay? So I actually have your grandchild. So
that's a moment, isn't
really
it?
Dodgy.
Heard it first at the Harrogate Spring Flower Show.
So the kombucha is made from SCOBY, isn't it? Which is a culture, and then you ferments with tea. I use tea bags, green tea, and it makes a drink, which you drink, which is really good for our health. It's really, really good for our bodies. So Keith runs fermentation workshops, and a really good friend of mine went on one of these fermentation workshops, and Keith gave him cut up the SCOBY and gave him a piece of SCOBY and said, and he named it after you. So he named it Keith, Keith the SCOBY. So I my friend was telling me about this, and he was like, I've got Keith the SCOBY is in here. Look at my kombucha. I was like, wow, I was really impressed. I said, can I have some of yours? And he said, yeah, it's got to be handed down. You have to name it after the person who gives it to you. So he has Keith, and I have Toby the SCOBY, which I have to think is a person. So I actually have your grandchild.
I've not heard that before, but I see the logic. But, I'll bear it in mind. At some point, you may pass it back to me, and it'd be interesting to compare.
Yeah.
Yes.
See
Mine's
how
got
they've
legs. Mine's got legs.
Oh.
It's got like tentacles and
down, a bit like this one here. So this is fermented tea. It's kombucha. You've probably seen it in the shops. It's getting fairly popular. People have started to buy it instead of many other drinks. It grows because there's a mixture of fungus and bacteria in that layer on the top, which is the SCOBY. And it ferments the tea with sugar in it and produces acid, which is acetic acid, and a mixture of lactic acid. And those two are arguably beneficial because they limit the bacteria in your digestive system. But they also produce other things like gluconic acid and glucuronic acid, which are metabolically beneficial to your liver. So it makes your liver more active. And that could be good if you want to get rid of toxins. So we have plenty of it there. I've got some in a bottle here. Would anybody like to try it?
Yes,
yeah.
try
All
it.
the hands go up.
Try it.
Okay, so I have a few glasses here.
Let me come help.
Let's dig this out.
Your glamorous assistant here, Keith.
So I'll pour a little bit of this. Won't give you too much, but there's plenty more in the pot if you want it.
It's actually relatively easy to make, isn't it? It's literally just boiling water, tea bags, and you leave it for a couple of weeks with your culture sitting on the top of it, and hey presto, you have this wonderful drink. It's an acquired taste, I have to say, but I would highly recommend you all give it a go. It's just so good for you. That's all that matters. Never mind what it tastes like. It's so good for you.
Can you hear okay? Yes, but right way around. And got some more. So easy to make, as you rightly say, Faith. You take a pot of tea, you add some sugar, around about 100 grams in a litre, so it's a good handful of sugar. I add some ginger, so I just peel some ginger or put ginger tea bag in, leave it to mash, and when it's cool, mix it in with the SCOBY. So you could start small. There's some little SCOBYs in these pots. And I'll pass that round. You can sort of see it in the liquid. If you took one of those, and there's some at the front, and put it into a pot, say this size, half full of tea, leave it to grow for a week or two. It'll cover, or gradually a layer will develop on the top, and you'll then be able to taste it going more acid. And I find the important thing is to judge whether you like it more acid or more sweet. So it's sweet at the beginning. As it gets more acid, you can judge when it's best for you to drink, or when you find the taste best. So it's simple to do. It can be judged just for what you like as taste. So that's the kombucha that we've got. We've also got other things that you can grow, and those are the fungi, which are in the bag here. These are dowels. I'll pass these around. You can see them quite clearly, that they're just little pieces of wood impregnated with mushrooms, and they will be able to grow if you put them into a log. So you would drill some holes in a log, put these in, the mushrooms would grow into the log, and within a year or so, you would get some fruiting bodies coming out. A quicker way is to take a paperback book and get some fungi and mix the fungi spores in between the leaves of the book. You sterilise it by boiling water or pouring water on it. That will sterilise the leaves or the pages of the book, and the fungi will go through. So you pass that around, you can see the fungi growing, and when you take the lid off, it will stimulate the mushrooms to grow out. So you can have your own different types of fungi from really reusable material, or things that we wouldn't otherwise use. There are some fungi here that are a bit old. They're from last season, really, last year. I've just brought them along as examples of bracket fungi that you would see on trees. And it's worth keeping an eye out this year to see what comes and get a bit of a feel for what is interesting, not just could I eat it, because some of them, yes, but if you feel them, some of these are just very hard. But what people are doing nowadays is extracting the material or growing them, say in a laboratory, and then using them as textiles, because the fibres can be incorporated into paper or fibres that you can grow, make into cloth or leather simulations. But years ago, people used to take big ones of these, and they used to soak them, get them soft, and wallop them flat with a mallet so that they could be spread out. And people would, if it was a really big one, they'd press it down on their head to make a hat, just
Mushroom
exactly
hats.
the right shape, or sew them together as cloth.
I need a mushroom hat.
You do need a mushroom hat.
I need that in my life.
I keep saying this, and they really should do one. Well, I've soaked them, but I've never got round to flattening them to my head. But
Can we do that? Can we have like a workshop, please? Can we do a mushroom hat workshop, please?
hat workshop.
Can we do that?
Perfect. Yes.
I think I know a lot of people that would do that.
It's been quite a long day at the show, hasn't it? Has it?
What are you trying to say?
Can I have a mushroom hat? That's brilliant.
Now, what you need is a beer. So the last thing I'll mention is brewing beer, which a lot of people have done, either beer or wine or making homemade alcohol beverages. Now, there's a sort of bad image sometimes when you go back maybe 20 or more years that people would have home brew and it would be pretty awful. And that's because they didn't have the right yeasts and the right conditions and so on. But today, the equipment is much better and the yeasts are more available and people's knowledge is greater so that you can brew really good beer and wine at home using your own ingredients or bought ingredients and so on. And we train people to brew, commercially and home brew. And some of the features that are fairly straightforward just need to be demonstrated. You know, it's okay to look at the theory, but you need the practice. You need to see the brewery in operation. And that's important. And we give our students 2 challenges. One is, here's a recipe, brew a beer to that recipe, and we will check if it's matching the beer that it should be. So anybody making beer or bread or any food needs to do it to the right specification. But then we say, okay, now you come up with a recipe and brew it and show us that it's a good beer, that it's one that people would like to drink and could possibly be saleable. But actually the third challenge is one that I'd like to mention in the sense of horticulture, and that's a challenge of brewing old beers. Now, we can look at a recipe from, say, 100 years ago and try and reconstruct that and brew the beer that it might have been. And we've done that a few times. This beer here, which is a porter beer, one of the dark beers, a bit like stout, but it was the beer that came before stout, wasn't brewed from 1960 onwards. It wasn't popular. There was still Guinness, that was stout, but porter, as the original style, had disappeared. And one day somebody said to us, we want a beer for Christmas. Can you brew us a special beer? And we said, okay. And they said, brew one that's, not available. So somebody gave us a recipe of porter from 1825. No, wrong, 1850. And it was from Whitbreads in London. They brewed loads of porter. And we said, okay, we'll make this beer. We did. And it was popular at Christmas. We didn't really know what it should be like because we didn't have an example to compare it to. And we brewed it again for this brewery, and it was still popular. And people then said, okay, but is it really what it was like all that time ago? And one day I was in the lab, and on a Monday morning, somebody came in and they said, I saw a bottle of that old porter at the weekend. I said, what do you mean an old bottle? And they said, a real bottle of porter. I said, where was that? I said, it was in a pub in Littlehampton on the Channel at the back of the bar. And he said, what's that old bottle? Knowing that we were interested in brewing. And they said, it's from the wreck that is in the Channel. It sank in the Channel. It's a bottle brought up from the wreck. And it was a bottle of porter. She said, that's really interesting, because if we could get a bottle of that porter, we could analyse it chemically, and we could work out the recipe. So we persuaded him. We didn't want the bottle in the pub because it might well have been deteriorated. We persuaded him to go and dive down and get some fresh bottles from the wreck. which he did.
Wow.
You know, gave him a few beers and to bring these back. He brought 2 back, and we were very interested. They were big bottles. They were, you know, big old dark black bottles, no labels or anything on them, but they were well sealed. They had a wax seal on the top, and we took one and we opened it at a sort of a meeting of brewers and tasted it. Now, I wouldn't do that now, but I did do it then. And people were very interested because they wanted to know what the taste was. So, okay, if I described it, I would say it was like somebody had taken a bottle of beer and they'd poured it into an old boot and left it for a week and tasted it. It was both stale and it wasn't very acidic, but it was very rough and tannic. So that was interesting, but we could do the chemical analysis. But when we were there, I had the microscope and was able to, you know, I noticed the last glass that we poured out was quite cloudy. So I looked at it in the microscope and I could see that there was a sediment and it had yeast in it, or cells in it. I didn't know what they were, but I thought, that's interesting. In the lab, we opened the second bottle in sterile conditions, and we extracted from that sediment a yeast, which grew. So we were able to get from a bottle from that shipwreck to get the yeast that was originally used in the brewing. Now that ship went down in 1825, so it was pretty old. And of course people said, well, how can a yeast survive so long? You know, it's been there for 150 years or more. Surely it must have died. And that's probably true, except that there were trillions of yeast. There were so many yeast that some would have died, others would have lived on what they had released. So there'd be gradually less and less. And as long as we got the bottle before the last yeast died, we could grow them up again.
Wow.
So we were now able to produce a beer, which is this beer, which had the first 1850 recipe, then the chemical analysis of the beer that was recovered, then the yeast from that beer, to put it all together to get a beer which was arguably a reproduction of an actual beer from 1825. I was really, you know, sort of proud of that because here we are, we've brought something back to life. But people still said, well, how do you know it's what it was really like? Because, you know, nobody's alive from 1825. Okay. We pondered on that. We didn't have any more samples. But I was at lunch one day in the refectory and the librarian was sitting on our table and she said, when we were talking about it, that's interesting because at the weekend I go to a care home where there's a chap there who always asks for porter beer with his Sunday lunch. He says, can't you give me porter? We can only give him Guinness because there's no porter. And I said, well, okay, here's a bottle of porter, take it and see what he thinks. So she took it and gave it to him, and he tasted it and he said, oh, he brought me porter at last then. And she recognised it as porter. Now he wasn't alive in 1825, but he was born in 1897. And he used to go to the pub for his grandmother to get porter, and she used to give him some from the jug when he was 13. He then went into the First World War, and he got gassed in 1918. And the only things they could give him while he was recovering was soup and porter. So he knew it really well.
Wow.
And he said, this is pure, yeah, this is just like porter, it is a pure drink. The librarian wrote this out as a transcript of what he said and got him to sign it. So I think we'd done the circle and come round and found a beer from all that time ago, which we'd got a version of and we'd had it sort of authenticated.
So that's like the oldest beer ever?
Well, interestingly...
Here we go.
Well, yes, it is.
Yeah.
Although recently somebody gave us a beer from a shipwreck in the Clyde Estuary from 1895, but that's a bit younger. But my I suppose, request, just to finish off, sorry.
That's all right, carry on.
My request is finding these old samples. It doesn't have to be beer, it could be anything. It could be a food, you know, it could be somebody was saying about seeds of old varieties of crops and things is very rare. It's hard to find them. And if you do find them, they're often deteriorated if they've been kept in warm conditions and things. But it is possible to find old bottles. Now, there's a couple of old bottles here. There's an example of a bottle from Vaux in Sunderland. And these were the commonly embossed bottles that people used to get years ago. They were reused. They do turn up occasionally, and I'm thinking sometimes people find them in old houses, cellars and things like that. But in the horticultural sense, they might well be dug up.
Yeah.
So if you're digging your garden, you're digging anywhere, or you're finding old corners and you find a bottle, please don't say, that's interesting, that might be worth something, I'll wash it out and sell it into an antique market or anything. Please let me know, and I'd like to have a look inside, because not only can we see if there's anything alive or analyse the beer, we can use the DNA now to find out what was dead, even though it's it's not alive now. But we can look at the profile of the DNA. So these things will be very valuable if we can find them before all the yeast die.
Wow.
That's fascinating.
Oh my goodness.
It's making me think of Ben Preston's watering can that he dug up.
So this morning we talked to a gardener who's just taken over a garden that has been a nursery since the 1800s, and he said last night they were walking through the woodlands and they found a copper watering can with a tree growing through it. And we said, you need to bury some things into your land so the next generation can find it. And we've come full circle over the space of the day, haven't we? Keith, for once in my life, I'm speechless. I am completely... yeah, exactly. Nobody's done that before. I'm so overwhelmed and excited by everything that you've literally sown a seed there. I think that's one of those things that... yeah, well, but it will generate a huge amount of interest, I'm sure, and a newfound respect for brewing and the potentials of mycology as well, which we're starting to use to biodegrade plastics and things like that as well. It's phenomenal. We could talk forever about it. But in the meantime, can we please say a huge, huge thank you to Dr. Keith Thomas of Brew Lab. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith.